So, patch 1.02 dropped not too long ago, and with it came many long anticipated changes, such as the Hurtbox overhaul and the arrival of the new character Gizmo. Patches almost always come with their changes towards character viability to answer the meta's problems, and this patch is no different. While we did receive some standard yet long-awaited buffs towards staple low tiers like Taz and Garnet, as well as quality of life nerfs for characters that have been aggravatingly prominent such as Superman and Arya, the Hitbox overhaul ended up bringing along its fair share of buffs and nerfs to the cast as well. Characters with disjoints such as Steven and Wonder Woman can now pressure other characters that lack such tools much more effectively. Characters without disjoints, however, got a large nerf since the hitbox is now tied to their models, taking away whatever disjoints melee characters may have once had. Bugs, Superman, and especially Jake at the start of the patch have been hit especially hard. That isn't why you clicked on this video though. You see, in this patch, Shaggy also got his fair share of nerfs as well, with the loss of much of his safety on his stronger moves. So much so that I would argue Shaggy has lost much of his character identity and by extension, his place in the metagame. So, what changed? Starting off with the official changes, Shaggy saw a severe nerf to his down tilt, a hefty nerf to his weight, and a reasonable nerf to his up special. The up special nerf isn't that impactful to Shaggy's overall game plan, so we won't cover that one too heavily in this video. The most devastating nerf in this patch, and possibly the hardest nerf to a character to this date in Multiversus, has been his down attack changes. Down attack had lost the character defining trait of being a primary combo starter and extension tool for Shaggy. He had also lost the armor present on the move that he would use to answer disjoints and jump ins more effectively. While both changes are big hits to the character, the armor in particular in combination with the Hurtbox overhaul makes it much more difficult to land since it's no longer slightly disjointed and it lost the trait that gave him answers to options he previously did not have answers for. But more on that later. Another big change was his weight drop. It was pretty hefty, but for a character like Shaggy who's required to get in, I believe it's much more impactful than most realize. If you think I've made these nerfs sound pretty doom and gloom already, you're definitely not ready to hear the more in-depth explanation later on in this video. But in case you think I'm a biased Shaggy main simply whining about my character getting nerfed, let's take a look at some cold, hard statistics. Before we jump into the statistics, we need to establish what role Shaggy plays in the meta of Multiversus. I think most everyone can agree, Shaggy is a beginner-friendly character with an answer to most every option in the game, giving him a low skill floor but a high skill ceiling. I often hear him called the Mario, or the Ryu of this game, and these characters have a very similar identity. Without any further ado then, let's go ahead and take a look at Shaggy's overall stats in the game. Looks fine, right? Around 50%. Sounds balanced in the most literal sense. Hell, he's even the second most used character in the game at the time of writing. Before you click off the video thinking that I'm just some big old baby whiner, let's take a look at another popular game that prides itself on character statistics, League of Legends. There's a particular character in League that has the identity of being a beginner-friendly character with good answers to most options in the game. Perhaps even the most beginner-friendly character in the whole cast, I might add. And his name is Garen. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's go ahead and look at Garen's overall win rate. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the statistical side of competitive games, the roughly 1% may not seem like a big deal, but I assure you this is a very bad sign for Shaggy. See, characters like Shaggy and Garen are typically more balanced around this 51.5% win rate due to a few important factors to consider. One of the more obvious reasons being they are intended to be beginner friendly, meaning anyone should be able to pick up the character and see at least moderate success without needing to dump too much time into the character. Given that character elo is separate from overall elo in this game, you should more often than not be placing it someone roughly the same skill as your first time Shaggy, and because of the nature of the character, you should see success in the earlier ranks, therefore inflating his win rate. Shaggy also has something Garen doesn't though, which is a higher skill ceiling. If we check the ranks, we can see that Garen tends to fall off quite hard at the higher elos, dropping all the way down to a 48% at diamond ranks and above. Ouch. This is because Garen still has weaknesses in a 5v5 oriented format that he doesn't have answers for. Shaggy, on the other hand, is a character that is intended to not fall off at the higher ranks, with the ability to outplay his opponent consistently with options for every situation, which defines him as the generalist he is. Granted, that's not to say his win rate should be inflated in high elo, but he shouldn't be falling too far below 50% at the high ranks. Keeping this in mind and accounting for him being more successful at the lower elos, he should undoubtedly have a higher win rate than he currently has. The worst part about it all is that at the time of writing, these statistics were taken just a couple days after the nerf had dropped. While you may argue that there may need to be more time given after the patch to see how it pans out, these stats don't reset with each patch, so a nerf with no compensation can only make this number go down, logically speaking. Now that we've established that he's in a critical position in the current metagame, let's discuss the impacts of his changes and why they were so destructive to him as a character. As we talked about before, the removal of the slight disjoint and the armor on down tilt really hurt the usability of the move, making it very difficult to deal with jump ins and disjoints. This is a huge hit for Shaggy because one of his biggest weakness outside of down tilt was a severe lack of a consistent anti-air. The fact that it lost a large part of its combo capability as well suddenly makes this a move with high risk with next to no reward. This is troubling as it makes standard gameplay much more of an uphill battle for Shaggy, as he's required to put himself at great risk to rack up any significant amounts of damage. Let's take Steven's Fair for example. Being a disjoint makes it difficult for characters without disjoints to deal with by nature. Shaggy lacking a proper anti-air with his up tilt and up air practically being useless moves also strongly affects his capabilities to effectively answer the move. Granted, he does have options to answer the move, but they all have severe risk with little to no reward. Up Special in particular took a hit from the Hurtbox overhaul when it comes to beating out aerials, as it comes out much too slow to reliably answer aerials without being expected to hard read it seconds in advance. And with the nerf to his ability to jump cancel afterwards, there's little reward for such unnecessary hard read. Extending off that idea, Shaggy can also hard read that Steven will go for Fair by preemptively running in with Fair or Nair to take advantage of Steven's slow startup. But this is also a significant risk that doesn't get him much reward outside maybe a second Fair. Sandwich is typically a reliable answer to disjoints, but of course that takes precious time in neutral to pull, and to make matters worse, Steven's Fair particularly reflects projectiles. While Steven's Fair is especially oppressive to Shaggy, the same argument can be made for pretty much every other jump in or disjoint in the game, leaving our jack of all trades with no answers. To really put the nail in the coffin though, they also reduced Shaggy's weight substantially. While yes, it did look silly seeing Shaggy live until 180, you have to keep in mind the role that weight plays for Shaggy's archetype and his weakness of having one of the worst recoveries in the game. Shaggy is a character that lacks overly oppressive neutral tools that aims to get in to gain access to most of his strengths. Because of this, Shaggy is expected to be the character that makes the first step or commitment when closing the gap, which inherently comes with its own layers of risk and decision making. Needing to make that first move means your opponent gets time to react and prepare to wall Shaggy out with inherently less risk than Shaggy. This extra weight Shaggy has over most of the cast is meant to compensate him for having to make the first move, with each unit of weight giving him more chances to get in. Granted though, I believe his higher than average weight class can be worked around at higher levels in play due to his poor recovery, and should be kept as a staple weakness of his. The fact that he has such a poor recovery is great for design purposes, as it rewards the opponent's skillful advantage state and optimal capitalization on Shaggy and his habits. Altogether though, these changes are undoubtedly a big hit from one of Multiversus' most popular characters. So, what does this mean for Shaggy? Shaggy's lost much of his reward to compensate for his stubbier buttons, and this puts him in a rough spot in the current metagame. There's little reason to pick him over other staple characters present in the meta. For example, if you want a character that succeeds in a rushdown game plan with the capability to confirm into early stocks, you're better off picking Superman with his immediate presence through his insane movement, combo game, and kill power that isn't gated behind charge. If Superman isn't your cup of tea, and you really like the utility Sandwich brings to the table, you're better off picking Batman and having an instantly accessible and maneuverable projectile that leads into combos. If you like the idea of a bruiser that can play more reactionary and control space well like Shaggy's sidekick or Sandwich can, you're better off picking Jake, who has more immediate stage presence with his stretchy punch and side special, better neutral utility, and blatantly better combo game. I could go on for a while, but the point is that Shaggy's strong combo game was a defining characteristic that gave reason to play him over other metagame staples. Clearly, this puts Shaggy in a rough spot in the current meta, but what can be done to redefine him as a character and make it so that there's a good reason to pick him over these beasts of the meta? I should mention that this is the opinionated part of the video where I give my insight as a Shaggy main on what could be done to breathe life back into the character. For credibility's sake, I will drop my Shaggy rank right here on screen so that you guys will know that I'm not talking out of my ass on this stuff. The first and the easiest change is just to revert one of the changes made to down tilt. As mentioned before, his high damage output defined him as a character and was the big strength he had over much of the other melee characters in the game. His armor is more necessary than ever after the Hurtbox changes to make sure he can actually scrap with characters that outrange him. Since it's very likely that without the armor, Shaggy's answer to jump-ins and heavily oriented game plans will be a glaring oversight in his archetype to have an answer for everything. The Hurtbox changes will also make down attack more punishable and easier to space around. If the issue was that they wanted to address that Shaggy was spamming the move too safely in neutral, I think a reasonable nerf in compensation for having the move back would be increased whiff recovery, to make it a tool that he can use to answer moves, but not overly oppressive in neutral. If you're really set on keeping the down tilt changes the way that they are, another avenue for compensation could be to give him more reliable answers in neutral to jump-ins and disjoints. Increasing the speed on uncharged up special would be a good way to give him a more definitive anti-air. Anti-airs in most fighting games are used in reaction to jump-ins, but in Shaggy's current state, it's near impossible to stop aerials, even if you know they're coming. Increasing the speed of up special slightly would theoretically give him a better answer to much of the meta that he struggles with, as well as still allowing him to get hit with super jump aerial burst options if the opponent commits to it. Another option that would admittedly be a lot more difficult to implement is to completely rework up air and up attack. At their current state, they're pretty much useless. The hitboxes and knockback of the move are just too inconsistent to use as reliable answers for whatever situation you could argue to use them for. The rework could be as crazy as changing the moves and animation completely to have more range, like for example Captain Falcon's up air from Smash, or as simple as adding more hit stop, hit stun, and making them send in a set direction to make it much more of a consistent combo tool. Rather than having awkward instances where you hit with a weird part of the hitbox and the juggle almost feels random on hit. If the goal is to keep him away from being a brawly combo-oriented character, you could give him better pure neutral tools. One small example could be to make his knee come out faster. It already comes out quite quickly, but since he struggles to answer most disjoints, he needs a good burst option he can utilize with his impressive speed to reliably call out disjoints in neutral, so a slight speed increase would really make a difference. Sandwich pull is another option that he uses to solve a lot of problem matchups, but in those same problem matchups, it's often difficult to even have space to pull a sandwich without someone dedicated to peel for you. Making the pull faster would make it a much more reliable tool in Shaggy's disposal and allow him to control the flow of neutral to the standard that other characters in the game have set. Since the goal of these buffs is to give him more of his identity back, we can't overlook one of the biggest identifying features in his charge. In its current state, it's good for calling out hard reads on movement and kill confirming at fairly reasonable percents. Super Sandwich is great for forcing options and threatening space, but it is understandably limited to once per rage. Without breaking the character, some aspects of rage that can be healthily buffed is instant transmission and weakened. Instant transmission is a great tool for Shaggy to have, but it is unbearably inconsistent in 2v2s when it comes to doing what it's supposed to. Due to a list of factors, Shaggy can get stuck on objects, not dash at all, and usually the hitbox comes out much too late upon arrival to effectively help peel for his teammates or assist in combos. Making the move more consistent would vastly improve his 2v2 capabilities and give him much needed utility to help enable himself as well as his teammates. Another option could be to increase the duration of his weaken. Currently, the only moves that apply weaken are combo enders, or moves that send the opponent much too far away to fully utilize weaken's effectiveness. Increasing the duration of the weaken would give his teammates and himself more opportunity to capitalize on the reward gained from obtaining the time and space to effectively charge, further defining his unique trait. This is not to be confused with the enrage buff he gives his teammates, as that's already in a healthy state. With the flexibility of the way that it's applied, it makes it a strong buff to give his allies. I should note that I'm not asking for all of the buffs listed by any means. If that was the case, he'd be a top 1 character no questions asked, and I don't think most people want that of this character. These are just a list of ideas for different buffs that can be applied to give him more of an identity and more reason to play Shaggy over other similar characters. Player First Games said themselves they use Shaggy as a baseline for character strength and aim to keep him in a healthy spot. It is my genuine belief that if Shaggy does not receive buffs for compensation, he will fall into a pit of mediocrity amongst most of the characters of the cast and be a bad example of a character to balance the game around. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Am I way off base? Is Shaggy's sidekick still way too strong for you guys down there in the millions rank? Are you still mad that Shaggy got in before Scooby? Be sure to keep the discussion going. I'm all for debate and feedback on the state of the game so that we can all work together to help make the game the best it can be. They are called Player First Games after all. That's all for now though. Stay tuned for more in-depth analysis of all things Multiversus.